So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's session. The climate crisis affects each and every one of us. Actions we take as individuals, coupled with national and international action, can help us understand, adapt, and mitigate against the climate crisis. This event will share how the improved and mainstreamed use of geospatial data and enabling technologies can and does lead to better outcomes and support effective policy making. During this session, we will demonstrate the role of location data in taking steps to achieve climate goals at both global and local levels. The event will showcase examples of how location data is already having a positive impact in regions that are affected by climate change in different ways. You will hear from a diverse and inspirational group of speakers from the United Nations and national governments who will share the progress being made. So good morning, everyone. My name's David Henderson. I'm the Chief Geospatial Officer at Ordnance Survey. Welcome to this event on applying geospatial information to climate challenges. As a cross-cutting sponsor of the KTN Space and Geospatial Virtual Pavilion, Ordnance Survey are delighted to be able to bring this event to you at a critical time in our international community. If you've not already done so, I encourage you to visit the event partner section of the platform, where you can connect and discuss with all the sponsors. I know that some of my Ordnance Survey colleagues will be available to talk with you after the event today. Over the course of this session, we will be talking about how governments are using geospatial information, not only for climate change, but for national development programs more broadly. We have a range of speakers from around the globe lined up, and I'd like to thank all of them for making the time today to share their knowledge and experiences. Some of them are calling into this call from some rather antisocial hours in their own country, so a special thank you to them this morning. We all know that climate crisis affects us in different ways, and the mitigation and adaptation measures that are being considered often differ at local, national, regional, and of course global scale. One thing we are certain about is the role that geography and geospatial data has in helping make informed decisions and supporting policy outcomes. This morning, the first part of our session will focus on actions that are being taken at the global level, which are having measurable impact at the national level. The second part of the session will focus on how national mapping and geospatial agencies are coming together to showcase how geospatial data is driving climate policies. So without further ado, it's a real pleasure this morning to kick this morning off and to introduce our colleague Greg Scott. Greg heads up the Secretariat of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management, UNGGIM. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce Greg. He's a renowned expert in global geospatial information policy and has worked really closely with the international community for well over a decade now in leading and being instrumental in the global adoption of better geospatial information management. Greg, over to you.
Thanks, David. And hopefully we can, as I bring on my screen, hopefully you can just see my screen I'm sharing now.
I can see your slides perfectly, Greg.
Thank you, David, and greetings to everyone around the world as we all participate in this really important event for 2021 and thinking about our climate for the future. As David mentioned, I'm just going to give a bit of an overview from a global context in setting the scene for some of our wonderful presentations that will be taking place today. And first of all, I will just give a bit of an overview very briefly about UNGGIM, or the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management. It's quite a mouthful, I know. UNGGIM was established in 2011 as part of the intergovernmental process for the United Nations, and it's now just over a decade old, or new, as many of us say in the UN system. The main objectives of UNGGIM, you can see there on the screen, and it's really been about setting some of the global directions on the use of geospatial information from a local to a global level around the world, and particularly how we build capacity in developing countries. And a real ambition of the Committee of Experts is to ensure that we can continue to make accurate, reliable, and authoritative geospatial information available to support national, regional, and global development, as David had just mentioned. So in New York, I'm responsible for the secretariat of that work, which sits within the Statistics Division of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. The other context I wanted to mention on, I won't touch on this too much because it will be discussed a little later in our presentations today, is really the consideration from a conversation from the Cambridge conference around really taking action, a time for action for national mapping geospatial agencies around the world, and thinking about how we collaborate across borders, how we collect and curate data, make data accessible, usable, reusable, and ensure that we use it in a standards and interoperable way. And the reason I just wanted to mention those key 4 points is that my presentation and the work of UNGGIM will cover a number of those aspects when we think about strategies and frameworks and methods for countries to use and leverage the power of location and the power of geospatial information. And for part of that context, the global development frameworks, as we call them, that were developed between 2014 and 2017, really do provide us with that framework. And that includes obviously the Paris Agreement on climate change, the Sendai Framework on disaster risk reduction, the outcomes on our oceans, on the Samoa Pathway, the urban agenda, and that's really the broad umbrella framework or agenda for all of these really important global agendas is the 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And importantly, this agenda, unlike the Millennium Development Goals, is significantly more transformative and integrated in the way it's thinking about information and innovative data resources that are needed to implement this very comprehensive set of SDGs. And the fact that in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, like climate itself, is that it relies heavily on geospatial information and enabling technologies. When we think about economic, social, and particularly environmental development, where progress has been made, there's a high dependency on location, where people are, what they're doing, how they interact, and how the world interacts around them is critically important. And understanding these dimensions to make change, to intervene, requires access to actionable data. Data that not only needs to be able to be delivered, but able to be translated into tangible outputs. And this is really important in the things that we do around the world. For national mapping and geospatial agencies, there's been a long, well understood mantra in what geospatial information represents. It represents this digital map or digital currency for decision making. Geospatial is a critical component to national infrastructure. It's a blueprint for what happens where and is used across many, many sectors. But at the same time, we're seeing digital transformation, we're seeing disruption, we're seeing changes in the way that we manage and acquire and deliver data is changing exponentially around the world. But at the same time, with that digital transformation, our societal expectations on how we deliver that data, at what level of detail, and how quickly we deliver that data is also changing quite quickly. So what we've been seeing over a number of years now is that while data remains that important primary currency, many national mapping and geospatial agencies around the world are being challenged by the disruptive nature of technology and how we best use those technologies to ensure that the work that we're delivering around the world remains relevant and agile. So When we think about these global development frameworks that I mentioned just a few minutes ago, within UN GGIM, over the last decade, we have been developing our own global geospatial frameworks. And they have started quite small in the early days, thinking about global fundamental geospatial data themes, thinking about how we ensure the global geodetic reference frame is enabled around the world, and ensuring standards and the licensing of geospatial information is anchored well into processes for many countries around the world. But we've built upon those with other frameworks, such as the framework on geospatial information services for disasters, for a global statistical geospatial framework, and a framework for land administration and management. Now, the challenge we had in developing those early frameworks is that we didn't have our overarching framework like we do with the SDGs. And so over the last 2 or 3 years, the development and now implementation of what we term as the IGIF, the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, is really our umbrella global geospatial framework that countries and organizations are now using around the world. So for the remainder of my presentation, this IGIF. But before doing so, I just wanted to mention about a geospatial roadmap, an SDGs geospatial roadmap that we've been developing in partnership with the Statistical Commission, is now becoming that bridge between the indicator framework of the SDGs and our geospatial capabilities. So this new SDG geospatial roadmap is in its final. The IGIF, it's a multidimensional framework. It comprises 3 key components: a strategy from local to global, implementation guidance, and action plans at the country level. And we will see some examples of these action plans from our speakers in just a moment. The idea and the main focus of the IGIF is so that geospatial information is able to be integrated with any other meaningful data to solve our societal and environmental problems, and that it enables countries to have the means and the mechanisms to develop a sustained geospatial information capability within a country and to address their national development priorities, including climate change. The framework is also strategic at its highest level in nature. It comprises a vision and mission, strategic drivers, principles, and goals. And you can see there with this vision, efficient use of geospatial information by all countries to effectively measure, monitor, and achieve sustainable development, to leave no one behind. The strategic drivers I will just touch on, and also after that, our strategic pathways, I think are really important, because it's these strategic drivers that define what's important for a country. And they can be from a global level, including the climate agreement, for example, but they can be even translate down to regional levels. For example, there's the Inspire initiative, Africa Union Action Agenda for 2063, but also to a local level and national development agendas, national transformation programs, and how we look at those priorities. So these drivers are incredibly important for governments. But there's a community aspect to this as well. As I mentioned earlier, when we think about digital transformation, we think about expectations from our community around the world and how we enable this capacity to be translated into use by users and the community. And particularly for us in the UN, is being able to bridge what we term as this geospatial digital divide. We also have with our goals, and I won't go into them in too much detail, but key ones include integrated geospatial information systems and services, the economic return on investment, sustainable education and training, and really enhanced communication to build capacity. These goals are our aspirational outcomes that we're after in terms of implementing a usable and sustainable IGIF within a country. The final part of that strategy at the very core is what is known as our strategic pathways, our 9 strategic pathways of the IGIF. And they're broken into 3 areas of influence: governance, technology, and people. And I'll explain those in just a moment. But importantly are the benefits. And I'll also touch on some of those benefits, because whilst we can say it's important to be able to understand and use geospatial and location data, for many decision makers, they need to understand the value proposition. What's the benefit? What do we get out of it? And what does society gain from this investment in a sustainable capability, beyond the obvious social and economic good that comes out of it? So the strategic pathways you can see here across governance institutions, policy and legal and financial. The bottom 3 strategic pathways are all about people, and they're fundamentally important, about how we build partnerships, how we ensure capacity development across and within countries, and education, ensuring that we can educate our children, our universities, our colleges, but on-job professional education throughout life careers, and also how we communicate and engage these important areas. And you can see just around the outside of those 9 strategic pathways that form our puzzle, as we call it, you can see some of those areas of benefit. And I won't go into the detail today, but each of those 9 strategic pathways get broken down into more elements and more actions as we get into an implementation guide that helps us guide our way through different components. Now, it's fair to say that particularly strategic pathway 1, governance and institutions, and strategic pathway 9, communication engagement, and those elements around leadership, around governance, and also ensuring that we have strategic messages and stakeholders and communication strategies are really the 2 most critical components of the IGIF strategic pathways. And finally, the 3 through the center of the puzzle are the technology pathways, which many of us would be very familiar with when we think about data and standards to support the provision of geospatial information. But innovation in particular is becoming more critical when we think about technological advances, about innovation and creativity, and processes that are improving within and across organizations to support the bridging of the geospatial digital divide. The benefits, I've included a number here. These aren't exclusive, they're a long list, but we think about them in terms of 2 ways: societal benefits, but also thematic benefits. Societal benefits about benefit to government and to users, and how we leverage development in technology and applications to reach our outcomes. But the thematic benefits are becoming more important when we think about how and where we apply across climate, across education and infrastructure, food security and supply, urbanization, etc. So these benefits are really critical to ensuring that the IGIF becomes an enabler for all levels of government and the broader community. And so that then enables countries to plan for and to sustain their economic growth and delivery of their geospatial information and services into the future, and how it supports development outcomes at a global level, but also at a local level. When we think about the climate agreement, that means also protecting the environment and being resilient at a local level, and how we do that in a transparent way. So these benefits are critically important. And finally, just to summarize very briefly, the framework, the IGIF, has been developed by all countries, for all countries around the world by UNGGIM. It provides a strategy, but also a reference and guide to develop and strengthen arrangements in geospatial information management. It's been designed primarily for developing countries, but what we're also seeing is many developed countries around the world are also implementing this IGIF to build a more strategic approach to their geospatial needs of their countries around the world. So with that, David, I'll stop and look forward to the following presentations. Thank you.
Greg, thank you ever so much. And that was a fantastic overview of so much work that's been undertaken by the global community in partnership with yourself and colleagues at the UN over the last decade. And it puts us in a really strong foundation for the next presentations. I'm really conscious, Greg, of your early morning, and we're going to jump to the other end of the day. And a real pleasure to introduce our colleague, Mishka Ben-Meir from Mongolia. And our next two presentations, actually, from Mongolia and from Ethiopia, really enable us to get under the skin of the implementation aspects of the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework and the importance of both leadership and also communication engagement at a national level in their pursuit of an integrated geospatial information framework. So thank you for setting those next presentations up so well, Greg. And it's my real pleasure now to hand over and introduce our colleague Mishka from Mongolia. Mishka, can you pick up the screen from here? That's tremendous. If you can just go into slideshow mode, and then we are good to go. Fantastic, Mishka, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to deliver a presentation on how implementation of Project 1890D, Strengthening Geospatial Information Management in Developing Countries towards implementing 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, triggered the start of geo-driven digital transformation and innovation in Mongolia. And I will cover what we have achieved so far and what we are planning to accomplish in the future. NSTI establishment in Mongolia has just begun 7 years ago because Mongolians has started to prepare GI professionals domestically since 2010. In 2018, Mongolia has been selected as one of the pilot countries implementing the project by UNGGIM. In accordance with the project, the government of Mongolia has taken in technical assistance from World Bank's Urban Resilience and Land Global Practice in 2019 for full investigation of NSTI. According to the consultants from the World Bank, the duration of the establishing NSTI would take 12 years. In the first 5 years of the project, this requires a relatively higher amount of investment. As a result of investment phase, every dollar we spend on NSTI is expected to increase to $2.54 within the operational period. With the help of the joint effort of both UNGGIM and World Bank, several documents have been developed in relatively short period of time, such as National Spatial Data Infrastructures Action Plan, Socioeconomic Impact Analysis, Investment Plan, and so on. In the first half of this year, NSTI Action Plan has had the approval of Land Reform Committee led by Deputy Prime Minister of Mongolia. Our vision is for geo-driven e-governance and innovation that empowers efficient and effective use of geospatial information towards national sustainable development. And our mission is to strengthen integrated geospatial information management and promote the value of the geospatial information through leadership, coordination, partnerships, advanced technology, and geostandards. As you can see, these 4 goals will help us to pursue our mission and vision. First of all, the quality information. The objective is to improve the quality of geospatial information for users by streamlining the collection and sharing of geospatial information through formal data governance processes, standards, compliance, and quality control, also the end user stakeholder consultation. The second goal is accessibility and usefulness. This one is for creating a system that interconnects geospatial information from multiple agencies and supports a variety of data formats for analyzing complex relationships, trends, and patterns across a broad spectrum of applications so that the new insights and solutions can be derived to tackle the socioeconomic and environmental challenges. The next goal is good governance. This one is for formulating the policy, legal, financial, and standards environment that accelerates the cross-sector coordination, industry partnerships, and stakeholder collaboration for the effective and efficient generation, processing, storage, protection, sharing, distribution, and ethical use of geospatial information. Last but not least, innovation and capacity. This one is for promoting research and development, innovation programs, and entrepreneurship by boosting technological capabilities and strengthening people's skills and knowledge, capacity to use geospatial technologies innovatively. The vision and strategic goals were developed in consultation with national key stakeholders at the Integrated Spatial Information Management discussion back to 2019. After many meetings with national stakeholders, including sector, higher level government institutions, private sector organizations, and non-governmental organizations, the Prime Minister's decree to overcome data sharing issues has established a ministerial task force to position, innovate, and guarantee information quality necessary to implement, monitor, and evaluate the relevant objectives and measures stated in Sustainable Development Concept of Mongolia 2030. This was a good start to raise awareness of IGIF among geospatial data maintaining organizations. LAMGC conducted the survey in the first quarter of this year and found out that there are many geospatial datasets being maintained nationwide. Also, some of them are duplicated. As a national mapping agency, the administration of the agency has decided to take action in terms of improving data quality. So as you can see, these are the icons of national fundamental geospatial data themes inspired by UNGGIM. Also, a data specification standard for each theme has been developed and endorsed in order to ensure the quality of data and proper data maintenance in last July. In recent years, our agency is actively engaging in developing systems for creating handy mechanisms to simplify the process of delivering governmental services related to geospatial data. Among this system, the first national geo portal has already been developed and awaiting to be launched in a few weeks. There is a long-term development policy called Vision 2050 from Government of Mongolia. In this document, there are a number of provisions that require national effort, such as until the 2030, the effectiveness and accessibility of state policy planning and implementation in regard to the land relations, geodesy, and cartography will be increased for creating a healthy, safe, and comfortable living environment. Also, by 2040, a smart and citizen-centered governance and management system on land with location-based information will be introduced in daily lives. Use of location-based information is beyond our imagination. It can be used in many sectors, ranging from disaster management to national and sectoral development planning. There are more than 60 specific key use cases have been identified. The following are the word geospatial information, and the NSDI has shown to deliver significant return on investment, support economic growth, and yield practical and quality of life benefits to citizens. The implementation of NSDI is expected to deliver the following: the governmental efficiencies, business groups, and social and environmental benefits. There are 30 actions across 9 strategic pathways of IGIF in Mongolian NSTI action plan. Currently, we have completed a few actions, namely defining fundamental data framework, creating a single national street address database, developing national geoportal, etc. As long as this requires a national effort, cooperation and partnerships play an important role. The agency has a newly funneled research team for conducting case studies for broadening partnerships while promoting the advantages of geospatial data. In the right side of the slide, you're seeing one of the case studies that a research team has completed recently. This shows inaccessibility of school in capital city, and by using the integrating statistical data and geospatial data, we have made this case study. There are particular direct impacts upon environmental protection and response to climate change, such as Mongolia is capable of cooperating with the global decrease in carbon dioxide emissions by better rangeland monitoring to match carrying capacity to quality of pasture, so avoiding overgrazing and land degradation. Also investigating opportunities for alternative eco-friendly energy schemes and detecting head loss with the fundamental geospatial data would make it better. In terms of urban planning, with the enhanced urban planning and smart city design, through access to the 3D digital twin, information models can save up to $2.6 million. Improved response to disasters events will save up to $33.2 million. Also, the new job opportunities in geospatial domain can bring us income of $6.2 million. Also, it's possible to reduce survey costs with $18.3 million with the help of NSTI. If you remember, the president of Mongolia has initiated a nationwide campaign, 1 billion tree, as a part of comprehensive project to combat climate change and desertification. About 77.8% of Mongolia's territory is affected by desertification and land degradation. Within the campaign, 120 million hectares of highly desertified land planned to be reduced by 4% and forest cover to be increased by 9% and greenhouse gas emissions to be reduced by 600,000 tons. It seems there is an opportunity to support this campaign by detecting the land to plant trees and monitoring with the use of geospatial data. To sum up, in order to provide stakeholders and end users with findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable geospatial data, it's crucial to establish an ecosystem where each of us can effectively cooperate. By introducing NSTI in our day-to-day life, single source qualified data can assist us to make scientifically based decisions, spend budget efficaciously, and avoid duplicated effort. The use of geospatial data is constrained with our imagination. Therefore, we are required to work on our creative thinking for opportunity to apply geospatial data to its full potential. Thank you for your attention, and this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you ever so much. That was a really great overview of the progress that you've made in your country over the last many years. And it's fantastic to see the development of not just the technical developments, but the understanding and commitment that is being made at very senior levels in Mongolia. So thank you for sharing that with us this morning. I'm sure there'll be some questions to come back to in a few minutes. I'd like to now hand over to Dr. Tulu Bedada, who is also going to share some experiences from the development of national spatial infrastructure, national geospatial infrastructure in his country, in Ethiopia. So Dr. Tulu, are you able to take the screen just now? I see your slides are on the screen.
Yes, thank you, David, and greetings to all audience for across the whole globe. I will briefly explain to you about the experience of Ethiopia in terms of establishing national spatial data infrastructure. Ethiopia has we have actually the national spatial data infrastructure has not been well established until the adoption of the integrated geospatial information framework. And we are planning to start the building national geospatial information spatial infrastructure by implementing the integrated geospatial information framework. Ethiopia is one of the 6 countries adopting the United Nations integrated geospatial information framework with support and technical guidance by the United Nations Global Geospatial Information Management Secretariat. We have prepared a draft country-level action plan for the implementation of the IGIF. Currently, the country-level action plan is under consultation with national stakeholders, and we are expecting to officially launch the implementation of the IGIF in early 2022. And geospatial information is the base for sustainable development. In Ethiopia, geospatial information is largely used along and in combined with socio-economic data set for decision making and policy setting across all sectors, literally, including agricultural sector, urban development, infrastructure, environmental management, climate actions, and resource management. In order to advance the sustained achievement of national priorities and also to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. However, access to reliable geospatial data set is limited, essentially due to lack of data availability at the user's desired scale, incompleteness of data coverage, scarcity of up-to-date geospatial data, uncertainty in the data accuracy and quality, both geometrical and attribute, and sometimes no complete metadata is available, inconsistent data content. And there is also a significant lack of interoperability between data sets, lack of appropriate data sharing policy and legal framework, as well as also limited access to data sharing platform. In our national circumstance, the integrated geospatial information framework is expected to play an increasingly important role in overcoming these multifaceted challenges related to access to geospatial data through effectively implementing its 9 overarching strategic pathways that are actually explained here, explained by also Greg in his last presentation. We normally focus on the implementation of all the 9 strategic pathways, focusing on governance, technology, people, with all the 9 strategic pathways. We followed the IGF template to develop a country-level action plan. The country-level action plan is aligned with national priorities as well as with organizational structure of our implementing institution. In Ethiopia, the adoption of the IGIF framework is highly aligned with the following key national priority goals. Especially, we are planning to leverage access to up-to-date and accurate geospatial information to transform agriculture through irrigation in order to secure national food security and also to enhance agri-processing and export. And we give focus on transformation of manufacturing through local selections. We will focus on mining sector reform, building digital economy. This is very important, where we actually started to develop a street addressing platform to leverage access to accurate location service to advance the implementation of e-commerce and e-governance. And land administration and management is also one focus area. In the last 7 years, we have been contributing to the National Land Administration and Management, where we have covered 43% of our national territory with high resolution aerial photogrammetry with a scale of ranging from 5 centimeters to 25 centimeters resolution, and millions of parcels have been populated into land information management. Especially there is a good advancement in terms of land management in the context of urban land registration. And also we are planning to enhance the application of the importance of IGF for tourism service modernization, as well as to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the implementation of the IGF is highly integrated and aligned with the institutional arrangement. We made a proper institutional arrangement in 2018, and we have a dedicated centers and technical directorate that can support the implementation of the 9 key strategic pathways related to the IGF. And we are currently, we actually assess the current state of the geospatial information management arrangements and reviewed the relevance of the strategic pathway actions to meet our desired future state. Then we prioritize the strategic pathways according to their complexity, and the IGF implementation activities were reviewed and consolidated based on comments and suggestions from the consulting team, a resource person from the United Nations GGM Secretariat, and also from national stakeholders. We have made inter-organizational discussions and engagement, and we make a series of consultative meetings with national stakeholders to get feedback on the overall content and scope of the IGF implementation and the development of country level action plan. As a part of the IGF implementation, we are also working to secure sustainable funding needed to operationalize the country level action plan. Currently, we are undertaking feasibility study, and this document will be submitted for endorsement by the Ministry of Planning and Development, so that the IGF implementation will be integrated into our 10 years strategic plan, and it will be sustainably funded. We will, with respect to the strategic pathway actions, we will establish a well-functioning steering committee and also specialist working group that can provide strategic leadership and coordination, and that can oversight and advance adoption and sustainable implementation of policy and legal framework and a standard. And we need to implement and operationalize the IGF country level action plan. So we will set an appropriate governance structure that can support us to help us to implement effectively the integrated IGF framework, including the SP1 up to SP9. We will also continuously monitor and evaluate the implementation of the country level action plan and revise and align the CAP with future needs and ensure sustained implementation of the integrated geospatial information framework. And we consider that the IGF framework is an evolving process and a living document, and our implementation plan will be continuously updated. Some of our key priority areas are standardization of data, identification of fundamental data teams and data custodians, enabling effective data sharing ecosystem, training and education, innovation, and communicate the socio-economic value of and importance of the IGF. We'll give focus on all the 9 strategic pathways, and we have set specific actions and also defined a specific objective for its full attainment and implementation. And with respect to capacity building strategy, we consider IGF as a guiding principle to advance our national geospatial information management arrangement. The implementation of the IGF country level action plan is integrated into our 10-year strategy plan, as well as we established a proper institutional structure that can integrate, that can advance the sustained operationalization of the framework. And in this regard, we are planning to avoid a single point of failure. Currently, we started delegating strategic pathways to our technical teams. We have different technical directorates. The SP1 and 2 can be handled by our policy directorate. The data pathway can be handled by data and system administration technical division. Innovation can be integrated into geospatial platform development, and also incubation and encouraging the private sectors to engage into geospatial industry through outsourcing of key activities. The standardization can be handled by standard and quality directorate. Partnership, capacity building, and education, communication engagement can be also handled by our capacity building and partnership technical directorate. And we are trying to secure all funding required for the implementation of all these 9 strategic pathways with the government-owned funding system. IGF is considered to be country-led and country-owned, and we actually working towards fully funding the implementation by the national government. And our next step is to, in a very near future, we will conduct the final stakeholder consultation workshop and officially launch the implementation of the CAP. A summary of the country level action plan document will be prepared and published in early 2020 and will be shared with the global community. And in this expectation, we consider that the implementation of the IGF itself has an impact on the national priorities and climate challenges. And IGF implementation will enable effective access to location data or geospatial data. Also, it can leverage integration of geospatial data with social, economic, and environmental data set for a better decision-making and policy setting. In particular, we identified that the implementation of the IGF within the context of Ethiopian situation can address 10 sustainable development goals. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, clean water and sanitary, affordable and clean energy, industry, innovation, sustainable cities, life on earth, peace, justice, and also the last one is on the climate action. With respect to the climate action, Ethiopian institutions are actively working to tackle climate challenges under the National Climate Resilient Green Economy initiatives. Annually, we are planting billions of trees, and where the national forest cover is increasing. And also, we are monitoring our forest cover, and we are assessing the trends. We are also estimating and trajecting greenhouse gas emissions. And some of our institutions are dedicated to biodiversity conservation, such as seed banking, climate resilient adaptive seeding, and also using improved varieties of livestock to reduce methane gas emissions. We are also investing as a nation on advancing and promoting the use of green energy sources like hydro power, energy, wind power, and also geothermal, biofuel, and solar power. And also we are currently trying to use a more efficient and environmentally friendly transport system, where we are focusing on expanding the national transportation with high-speed railways. The IGF implementation will actually advance the sustainable development of Ethiopia and will benefit the global community at large. And I thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Tulu, thank you. I was just struggling to come off mute. I was busy thanking you for your presentation, but realized that nobody could hear. Tulu, thank you ever so much for sharing your experiences and the progress that you're also making with so many important themes. And thank you to all of our speakers so far for working within the allocated 15 minutes, so that perhaps now we could reconvene for a short conversation. I know that we've had a couple of questions that our online virtual audience have provided. So perhaps Greg, Mishka, Tulu, if you'd like to come back onto the screen just now, we would be able to questions amongst one another. I mean, firstly, Mishka, if I can come straight to you, it was a really great presentation, and one question which I also wanted to ask, actually, to both yourself and to Tulu, was what one particular piece of advice would you give to a country who is starting out on not just the path of implementing the integrated geospatial framework, but building a geospatial infrastructure to support the very many socioeconomic, environmental challenges that both yourself and Tulu shared with us. I just wondered if there was one piece of advice that you would provide to other countries, what would it be?
Thank you for the question. Well, establishing an SGI requires a lot of effort. According to my country's experience, it appears partnerships, communication, engagement, and commitment are key factors helping us to intensify the project. The reason why I accentuate aforementioned factors exists probably in data custodianships of the different agencies. Before the Mongolian Open Data Portal from the government of Mongolia launched, the data sharing used to take a bit longer period of time. And enabling the open data to the public, this helped us to save time and simplify the process of taking information. So the key idea I'm trying to deliver is communicating with the national stakeholder would be the main factor to intensify this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also from our experience, like the implementation of the IGI for national special data infrastructure can be achieved by actually starting from governance and institutional arrangement. In some countries, if there is no clear institutional arrangement and also governance issues that should be sorted out. So it's very important to have a clear governance and institutional arrangement, and also there should be a dedicated national institution who has a mandate to lead the implementing the national spatial data infrastructure. So that's very critical, and we actually had on this solved this challenge about 3 years ago. So now our institute has a clear mandate on leading the national geospatial information, national spatial data infrastructure. And with this governance and institutional arrangement, having a proper national arrangement, we can actually coordinate all the stakeholders, and we can work on the remaining strategic pathways, and that can be, I think, achievable.
Thank you, Tulu. And I mean, Greg, perhaps ask the same question actually from yourself in the broader sense. In your presentation, you also talked of the importance at one end. Sorry, my hands are on different parts of the screen. I don't know how the mirror works, but on one element of the square, you were talking of leadership. On the other corner, you were talking about the importance of engagement and communication. And particularly Mishka, I was hearing talk about accessibility to data and being able to demonstrate early wins and benefits arising. Do you think that you could expand a little bit on those points in terms of kind of your your golden piece of advice, if you like, in terms of starting out, which is most important.
Yeah, thanks, David, and great presentations to Mishka and Tulu. So thanks so much. Look, I think one of the things that we need to consider here, and this is just the diversity and the breadth and depth of country situational arrangements around the world. On one hand, we have geographic diversity. What Africa as a continent has its own challenges. Asia has its challenges. Europe has its challenges, etc. Latin America. So they're all very diverse. But I think to cut to the core, we did find when we did the global consultation and we workshopped the IGIF with more than 130 countries, was that having this leadership you can achieve so much with. Without leadership, you can achieve very, very little, and in fact go backwards. So that was first and foremost. And the second part to that is, with leadership, you also have needs to communicate that the importance and that value proposition. Now, everything else comes after that, but in whether it's talking about data, about partnerships, about technology and innovation, they're all critical. But without those two key enablers of someone at the front leading, but also the communication that goes with that, particularly to governments and decision makers, are absolutely key. They're really the pointy end of the problem statement, and then everything falls behind that. And I think as we look at our global challenges today around the world, that resonates. We talk specifically about geospatial and other location data, but that resonates in many different areas around the world at the moment.
That's great. Some real common strands that certainly resonate with me. And I think, Greg, you make a great observation of the different sort of contexts that exist, if I can say regionally, across the world. And it's so important to take those into account, of course. Maybe just staying with yourself, Greg, and perhaps then ask Mishka and Tulu to also comment. I think a lot of the early stages of IGIF talked a lot about sort of almost socio-economic challenges. And I just wondered whether you observed any countries that were prioritizing the development and implementation of their integrated framework, their national strategies around climate action, and specifically around more of the environmental themes. And I guess particularly thinking about those countries that perhaps faced most with the immediate challenges of living with climate change.
Yeah, that's an insightful question that I know has been asked many, many times, and certainly the focus when we think about benefits and data and is around that economic and societal benefit. But I think the third pillar of development, the environmental pillar, is often left behind, or to some degree has been seen as part of the trade-off to achieve that socio-economic development. But what we're seeing now more and more within the IGIF, and also I think too the sensitivity around the world, is about these environmental impacts. And so one of the key elements that we've started see now is in two areas. One is about just resilience. It's community resilience, but it's environmental resilience as well. And so in particular, two countries that we're working with in developing the IGIF, Fiji and the Kingdom of Tonga, are small island developing states. For them, climate and climate resilience is absolutely fundamental to government to implementing that framework. And it's simple things. We need to know how much the sea is going to rise. Is our island still going to be above water or below water by the end of the century? It's as basic as that. However, we need the data and the science to tell us what that looks like. And this is why this is incredibly important. It's not just so much the data, but it's the modeling. When we think about more severe events, wind events, rain events, flooding, nearshore, offshore, storm surge, all of these things are really important, and they're data driven. but we need to have the science that goes with that, which is going to be fundamentally important. But to summarize, the answer is yes. And two specific examples that we're working with on climate are Fiji and Tonga, because of the fact they're small island developing states.
And I know we'll go on and talk a little bit more, perhaps through the specific lens of national mapping and geospatial agencies and the response that we're making to climate action. But I just wondered, Tulu, Mishka, whether the environmental impacts that perhaps Greg was talking about, those have become more important over the last few years, and particularly in the run-up this year to COP26 and your future look in your own national responses. Mishka, did you want to comment particularly on that?
Sure. As I mentioned in my presentation, more than half of the Mongolian territory has affected with the desertification and the land degradation. And our research team is working on to detect where to take an action by using the integration of statistic data and the geospatial data here. Well, the environmental challenges we are facing now are caused by human. So the solution to this would be a human. So by focusing on the capacity building and raising awareness of these challenges and its solution, it would be easier to tackle this situation, I think.
That's great. Tulu.
Yes, also our as you know, our Ethiopian economy is mostly dependent on agriculture, and also Ethiopia is affected by recurrent drought, and recurrent drought is affecting our major economic sector, which is agriculture, and also this will affect our national food security, and government is giving more attention to actually compact challenges related to climate. And in this regard, we have some of our key institutions, together with our Geospatial Institute, has been working to address some of key climate challenges, such as working on resilience, biodiversity, for example. Especially we are supporting the resilient biodiversity seeding. So the new seed varieties can also be implemented in the way that it can actually be adapted to the changing climate. And also we have been supporting the green economic legacy, where we are contributing to monitoring of forest, and this is integrated with land conservation and resource conservation. And in some part of our country, also the impact of climate change is related to good land governance. Like, government is giving more priority to areas that are affected by climate change, and farmers those farmers whose land is properly managed by land integrated information management system has been given due attention to get a collateral funding. Now farmers with a parcel of land registered based on geospatial information can have access to collateral funding, where they can actually have an opportunity to build additional economic activities. They can invest in some additional economic activities so that they can build their resilience to recurrent climate change impacts.
Tulu, thank you. And I just have one sort of final question, I guess, for you all, which maybe just a brief answer of encouragement, maybe, an acknowledgement of how it's perhaps working in your countries, again, Tulu and Mishka. But it strikes me at the moment that we're increasingly in a world where there is lots and lots of data and increasingly large amounts of innovation. Greg, you had a fantastic slide near the start of your presentation that talked about the availability and the opportunity associated with disruptive technologies and what that's enabling us to achieve. I guess I observe that at the moment, both geospatial and climate action is often being led and taken forward by what we might describe as kind of early stage startups, innovative companies who are aiming to apply geospatial information to very specific geospatial challenges. And I think it plays strongly to the notion of collaboration between government intervention, the private sector, citizens themselves, and taking action. And I just wondered whether you could speak to any examples where you're seeing those different communities coming together, and particularly national agenda shaping local and citizen-led activities. And perhaps Tulu, could I come to you first?
Yes, I think there is one use case in Ethiopia, like there is crop insurance. Crop insurance is a recent initiative launched by the government through understanding the impact of recurrent drought on the small farmers, small landholding farmers. So the farmers' agricultural productivity would be affected by the climate change, especially with limitation of shortage of rainfall or even excess of rainfall. So in the case of if there is any significant impact on the productivity of their land, I think the farmers can actually enter into crop insurance agreement, and the insurance providers are the private sectors, and government has set up appropriate policy that can actually help the private sector to contribute to what is building resilient community that can actually combat the climate change. So there are some sort of different case uses where the private government and the community are working together to tackle the impact of climate change.
It's a great example. Thank you, Tulu. Amisha?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Now we are working on the broadening our partnerships more than supporting the startups or the small businesses, because the capacity building is not enough to using the geospatial products, and digital divide is real in Mongolia. So we do need to focus on our people. Of course, our NSTI action plan has an action to support the startups, but all we need to do in the first phase is collaborating with academia and delegates from the private sector or ICT companies.
Mishka, thank you. And Greg, a sort of final word from yourself. Do you see evidence of the change, if you like, over the last few years as some of these smaller startup companies start to both present opportunities for disruption, but actually taking action and making progress on the national frameworks that are being laid out? I don't know whether there's any immediate beacons, if you like, that stand out for you where this is happening, or just any general comments that you'd have.
No, there definitely are, David. And I think the hardest part is just working out what those arrangements are. There's just so much innovation that's taking place by our younger generations, if I can call it that, by just ingenuity and innovation. And the challenge that I think that traditional, we in traditional governments have is how we make that work. And part of that is just the data and the process. The other part of it is saying, well, okay, I can take your data, I can value add, I can do much more with it. I can report back at a community and to other levels. How do I feed that back? What's that loop and what's that partnership? And I think that's part of the storming that we're trying to work through at the moment, or in different countries around the world, is how we make those sorts of partnerships and interactions work and be sustainable, because they're not going to go away. And that's part of, that key word, disruption, that we see in the future.
That's great. Well, listen, I'm ever so grateful, not least by the different time zones that together we're here virtually today. Mishka, Tulu and Greg, you've introduced very many different aspects of the development of national infrastructure and the importance of putting in place the frameworks which allow geospatial information to have positive impact at national level. And really grateful for you taking the time this morning to join us in this forum and to share your experiences and provide such compelling words of both inspiration and encouragement to other countries. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, and hope that you're able to stay with us in the background for the next half hour or so. But I'm going to segue at this point onto the second half of our session this morning, and introduce one of my colleagues from Ordnance Survey, Matt Goodman, who is going to talk a little bit about the Cambridge Conference, an esteemed group of senior leaders from national mapping and geospatial agencies who recently gathered specifically to look at the contribution and the action that we can take. I say we because Ordnance Survey is proudly part of that community, that we can take in applying geospatial information to climate challenges. So without further ado, I'll just hand over to Matt, who can pick up the story and introduce a little bit more about the Cambridge Conference. Matt, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. As David says, my name is Matt Goodman. I am Head of External Affairs at Ordnance Survey, and very happy to join you today to discuss the Cambridge Conference. So this first hour has been absolutely fascinating. It's been really interesting to hear how countries are taking the IGIF, how we're using that data already to tackle some of the more complex challenges within our response to climate change. But what I wanted to talk about today is how we convey that story, and particularly share that story with both our national governments, but to share the work that we as geospatial agencies do with the rest of the world. And the Cambridge Conference, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a background about that, talk a little bit about what we're doing this year, and then talk about how we're going to be making more recommendations and taking that forward in the future as we look at the outcomes of COP26 for both our community, but for the governments and the wider international effort around climate change, which we support. So a little bit about the Cambridge Conference. It's nearly 100 years old as a community. Since 1928, we've been gathering the heads of national mapping and geospatial agencies together here in the UK, often in Cambridge, which is why it's named the Cambridge Conference. It's also been hosted and will be hosted again in Oxford, so don't let that confuse you. There's a historical link here. Every 4 years, getting this group together, bringing the same people into the same room to have a conversation about common challenges, think about things where we as national mapping agencies are tackling some of the similar technological, societal, environmental changes that we have tackled for many hundreds of years now, at least. But thinking about those in a way that allows the peers and the individuals to talk about those topics in a way that allows them to share their insights and to really discuss it with people who understand. So we had hoped to host this alongside the UN's virtual high-level forum in 2020, but due to the pandemic, we've had to delay it. And so because we've had to delay it, we thought we would take the opportunity to try and tie this effectively to the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, to think about how we as a community can share our insights and what we're doing already, what we're doing today, to talk about the role that geospatial data plays in the climate response, but then also to look at how that carries through into the next side, to the other side of COP26. What happens after? Many of our conversations have talked about how we as a community build up to these 2 weeks where we look at the critical moment of discussion around climate change commitments. But after these 2 weeks are over, how do we as organizations help our countries take that those commitments, those responsibilities to both our people, to our environment, to our world forward, and how can we make the most difference? So as a community, we thought it was important to think about it ahead of time and then to move on to the next point of what can we do in the future. So in September, in order to do that, we brought together a virtual group of attendees. We had about 80 delegates registered from more than 50 countries. And we had some really substantive and really helpful discussions, both case studies of where geospatial data is being used already, but also some discussions about how we align to the themes that are up for discussion in Glasgow. And at the end of that conference, we had two events on the day. At the end of that conference, we had a paper. We've drafted a paper that is about, I guess, our community's view, our statement about what we can do to support the climate change and the climate challenge response. So talking about our role in that response, how do we support our country's climate responses? We collaborate across borders. We ensure that geography is our common framework by enabling all countries, regardless of economic or political differences, to tackle common issues. We collect and we curate authoritative data, which means that we can provide the data that's necessary, that can be trusted, that can be relied upon, as we've heard in this first hour. How do we make sure that the policymakers in the international community recognize that role? And then how do we make sure that that data is accessible, reusable? How is it findable? How can we make sure that other and new emerging data sets, again, that we've referenced in this first hour, how do we ensure that those are focused on specific problems where our role, our data, geospatial data, can provide a framework to bring together different data inputs and provide more insightful data analysis, better data science to help us tackle particular problems. And then how can we ensure that standards move beyond, I guess, a geospatial silo and make sure that our interoperability, that our technical solutions can tackle common problems in a consistent way. So articulating that role, we came up with 4 recommendations, 2 for the NMGAs, 2 for the National Mapping and Geospatial Agencies who attended our event. And that's one of those, and the first of those is about how we take an active leadership role as an advocate for geospatial data in our own countries, and making sure that we can speak about and articulate clearly the value that it brings to the national adaptation and mitigation for climate change, and making sure that we have the impetus to act as drivers for change, to make sure that we can empower our countries, make sure that they have an active advocate for the power of geospatial in their policy conversations. And then how can we as a community recognize that it's a climate change issue is one that affects all nations differently. So how we collaborate, making sure that we collaborate, making sure that this conversation and that we as a community continue to bridge divides will enable us to create a common response to what is ultimately a common global challenge. But what can our governments do to support that? And in the paper, we have suggested that there is an opportunity for governments to mandate that use of authoritative location data, making sure that they recognize the value that it brings, asking them to sponsor our work, both on a policy side, but also from I guess a principled side, making sure that we are able to link that critical data from our governments, from industry, from our research institutions, NGOs, civil society, bringing all of that together using geospatial data as a lens. And how can we make sure that that continues to be fit for purpose? How can we continue to provide the data that our customers need? And that's only through investment and through access to the levels of support that are not just in principle, but are also in practice. How do we make best use of our national will and the national response? So how can we make sure that those nationally determined contributions are underpinned by our data? So those recommendations sit in the paper. If you'd like to read more, they are on the website, the Ordnance Survey Cambridge Conference website. So it's os.uk Cambridge -conference. And we are then taking that paper, that conversation into both events here in Glasgow, virtually today, but here in Glasgow over these 2 weeks, and then also thinking about how we take that forward into an in-person event in April, COVID permitting, obviously. But how can we take the outputs of those negotiations and discuss them, and again bring that community together to think about the practical implementations of the commitments that we make in these 2 weeks. So that's happening in April 2022, the 12th, 13th, 14th. There'll be more detail about that for the national mapping agencies who are on the call at the moment, coming out shortly. But for those of you who are interested in watching, we'd love to have your opinions on that paper, on the role that the national mapping and geospatial agencies can play, and how we can better support the provision of trusted and authoritative data in that climate response. So I hope that's a useful context for how the Cambridge conference works and where we're going over the course of the next 3 months.
Thank you so much. That was great introduction and overview to this community on the call this morning as to the background of both Cambridge conference, but also actually the spirit of that community of senior global leaders coming together to address something which is bigger than any one organization, and providing a forum for collaboration and action taking, which has endured over a very long time. When we convened the conversation a couple of months ago to start to shape our collective response ahead of COP26, we were blessed with a number of presentations from around the world of organizations who have taken action and had case studies that really cut to the core as to the positive value of geospatial information tackling climate change. And it's in that spirit I'm delighted now to share with you one of those case studies and introduce our next speaker, who is Rafael Elmong. Rafael is the director of the National Center of Geo-Environmental Information in Costa Rica and the Costa Rican Ministry of Environment and Energy. Good morning, Rafael. Really great case study of action and impact that you shared with us at the Cambridge conference this year, and I'm really grateful for you replaying that case study today in this virtual pavilion for the audience this morning. So I'll hand over to you and let you take the floor from here. Thank you.
Of course, David, thank you. It's great to see you again now in this COP26 event. Thanks to everybody who has joined this conversation or who will see the recording. And thanks a lot to Ordnance Survey for the invitation. And following up on the conversation we had for the Cambridge conference on September, thanks again for inviting me to share about our experience in Costa Rica, how we are using location data to tackle climate challenges. Well, I said my name is Rafael Monge, and I work in this National Center of Geoenvironmental Information at the Ministry of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. And well, also, if by the end of this session you wish to know more, have any questions, you can also contact me using my social media handle, rafaelmonge.cr. Well, Costa Rica is a country that is, just give me a second to go back. I put the last slide and not the cover. Now it's taking a little while. Yeah, we practiced this in the beginning. So, as I was saying, Costa Rica is a country committed to sustainable development. We have achieved to make sustainability part of our DNA and built a world-renowned country brand focused on conservation, reforestation, and our system of national parks and protected wildlife areas. This has been an important driver of economic growth and well-being for Costa Ricans. Currently, 60% of our territory is covered by forests, and since 2013, the land use sector came to be considered a carbon sink in the accounting of our greenhouse gas emissions, absorbing up to almost 5 million tons of CO2 in 2024. We also face significant challenges in terms of sustainability. For instance, deforestation in Costa Rica amounts to 17,000 hectares per year, and it occurs in a dispersed manner in relatively small territories, which makes its precise estimation a challenge. In addition, it is feared that this may have increased due to the effects of the global pandemic and the need for resources, especially in rural areas. Well, to face these challenges, and not too many years ago, like many other countries, Costa Rica has traditionally monitored and managed its forests, biodiversity, and agricultural lands separately. However, their strong interdependence made it necessary to develop a more comprehensive form of monitoring, recognizing the need to harmonize land use and resource management. Costa Rica built the National Land Use, Land Cover, and Ecosystem Monitoring System that we call CIMOCUTE. This CIMOCUTE is a comprehensive national-scale monitoring system that produces consistent information on the current extent and changes in forests, agricultural, and other land uses, land covers, and ecosystems. Several subsystems harmoniously integrate field and remote descent data to produce information that will inform decision-making and support the development and implementation of sound land management policies. The data also support a variety of national and international initiatives, such as the National RED Strategy for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, the National Decarbonization Plan, the National Adaptation Policy, and well, some other that in the previous presentation from Greg were mentioned too. We have conceptualized CIMOCUTE as an integrated system of systems that is founded on three interrelated processes. The classification that responds to the question of what, the mapping that is related to the question of where, and the inventory and related registries that tells us information about the how much. The classification process provides a common land use, land cover, and ecosystem classification system that is used by all other subsystems of the inventory and the mapping processes. And these subsystems interrelate synergistically to increase the value of the data. Key subsystems in CIMOCUTE include sample-based area estimation to monitor changes in the areas of the country's land uses, land covers through visual interpretation of these attributes from high-resolution imagery using a systematic grid of plots. Also a field-based national forest and other lands inventory to monitor forests and other attributes that are only measurable on the field, and the mapping to describe the spatial distribution of the different land uses, land covers, and ecosystems. CIMOCUTE has been constructed in a highly participatory fashion that included stakeholders from more than 40 government, academic, international, and other institutions, primarily representing the environment, urban, and agriculture sectors. The work is coordinated to this through thematic technical work groups, which focus on specific subsystems or other elements of CIMOCUTE, and they have an advisory role. Their main functions are to develop, review, and adjust methodologies, indicators, protocols, standards, and other tools for monitoring the landscape while ensuring continuous improvement. Actually, the first working table we started, it was the sample-based area estimation work group on 2017. And later, the other processes began including the land use, land cover, and classification system, the mapping, ecosystems, national forest inventory, and also the work group on agricultural lands. We started designing this CIMOCUTE in Costa Rica in 2015. Actually, I started my position in the in the National Center of Geoenvironmental Information in 2017. It was on track. But we formally adopted it, Simokute, with an executive decree that is shown in the screen, signed in 2021. This was signed by our president, of course, and 3 key ministers for government: the Minister of Environment and Energy, the Minister of Agriculture, and the Minister of Justice, since in Costa Rica, our National Geographic Office is coordinating with this ministry. This formalization marked the evolution of Simokute from a design stage to an implementation stage where we are now. With this decree, we formalized the governance structure. This includes an executive committee with representatives from the environment sector, the agricultural sector, and also representatives from Costa Rica's National Institute of Geography. It also gives the role of this coordinating unit to this National Center of Geoenvironmental Information, the office that I coordinate in the Ministry of Environment. And also it formally establishes the technical work groups, even though, as I mentioned, we have been working with this scheme during the design stage. And we have also envisioned an opportunity of improvement here, even though the decree has just come out. We want to create a reform to include representatives from the Housing Ministry in the steering committee. They are already part of the technical processes with the working groups, sorry. We call them mesas técnicas or tables, but in English we say groups better. And they have been integrated, the colleagues from housing are integrated technically, but we also want to strengthen the governance of Simokute by including them in the signing of the decree and also of a new decree, and also in this steering committee. But what I wanted to mention here is it's important to highlight this level of integration that we have achieved in this process. This result has not been an easy task and has taken a lot of effort during these years, but reaching this level it gives us a better position to implement and organize activities. Well, for this, we have been working together since for a while now. These are pictures from before the pandemic. We have a lot of meetings of these working groups, technical discussions, also a lot of capacity building. This capacity building is a very important component of the process. And well, after when the world pandemic started, we just had to adapt. And now these are how we take pictures of our calls or for meetings. But the work has continued. And just to give you an example of some of the results from this process related to the forest sector. In Costa Rica, we have been able to demonstrate a good performance in the management of our forest emissions that can be tracked in our greenhouse gas inventories. This has enabled us to receive results-based payments. And in 2020, we received these contributions announced that amounts up to $120 million from the Green Climate Fund and the World Bank's Forest Carbon Partnership Facility. This funding is coming to strengthen our capacity to conserve our territory or forest. And also, this is from 2021, but this year or last week during COP26, it was announced that Costa Rica is also one of the first 5 countries that signed an agreement with the LIFT Coalition that is also providing this a new scheme of result-based payments that is supporting Costa Rica. And this is not related to performance, but also to transparency, being able to demonstrate with data, with science, how we are managing our forests and the emissions related to that has enabled us to get access to this kind of funding. And this is crucial for us because since the pandemic, the local budget or taxes have been, the income from our government has been reduced, and this has also jeopardized some of the programs that we have in Costa Rica. So this is very crucial for us to achieve. And well, but there's a lot of other things going on in our country related to to mapping and modeling spatial information and use it to make decisions. This is just an overview of some of this collaboration that we have been working on. For instance, how we are modeling ecosystem service or natural capital with the Stanford University's Natural Capital Project, or how the group on observations has been collaborating us for this project and also for the tackling deforestation and forest degradation. We have been also working with UNDP to develop maps to map essential life support areas, which is a very innovative methodology that is integrated different sources of geospatial information into one map that can tell us where to protect, manage, or restore our territory. And all this is trying to get together into the reporting from our state of the environment, the report of the state of the environment that we're working now to accommodate all this information into one analysis, one compendium of information for easy access for people. Well, if you wish to know more, I invite you to visit our website, simokute.go.cr, where you can find a lot of more information for the work we're doing. Also, we have participated in this case study from FAO on a open online course on forest and transparency under the Paris Agreement, where you can learn more about how Simokute has been built and other forest monitoring systems around the world. And just to close, I want to tell you that what's really important is how we manage to translate all this information, data, and science into action, into policy action, to climate action, by increasing agricultural productivity and sustainability, adding value to our tourism sector, or improving land use management. This is what we are aiming to do, and we're very proud from the work that we're doing, and appreciate a lot of the collaboration we have received from different stakeholders around the world. So thanks a lot for your attention, and happy to take any questions in the next section.
Rafael, thank you ever so much. That was tremendous. And it was great to hear the case study actually about Simokute a second time, because I think you bring so much color to so many different aspects of its success, not just the more recent funding opportunities that the program has unlocked, but a huge amount of attribution to the benefits of collaboration in real practice. And you speak so eloquently around the importance of collaboration, both within Costa Rica, but also more broadly. So thank you again for sharing that with us this morning. I'm just going to hand over to our last speaker of this morning's session. Nikki Smith is a colleague of mine here in the UK. She's a senior specialist working for the British Geological Survey with a background in both geology and environmental remote sensing. For Nikki, geospatial information has been integral for her work for many years, and she brings a very broad perspective, having worked internationally with many different partners and enabling them to gain greater value from the spatial data that they hold. Nikki has been working really closely with us at Ordnance Survey on the outputs and outcomes from Cambridge Conference. And Nikki, I know you were looking to share with us this morning some of those outcomes, and particularly doing the full circle with COP26 happening right now in Glasgow, and just perhaps making the reference back to the goals and objectives of COP26 and the conversations that we had with the community that joined us in the Cambridge Conference recently, and bring that all together for us. So hand over to you just now. Nikki, thank you.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everybody. So during this presentation, I would just like to give you, as David said, an overview of the discussions that we actually had during the Cambridge Conference, highlight the key points that came out of those discussions, and introduce the output from the conference. So why did we have this Cambridge Conference in conversation? So as national mapping and geospatial agencies, we know that we can have a role in helping to meet the COP26 goals, but there are questions that we need to ask of ourselves to help define that role. So are we involved in the climate change discussions, and how can we engage more with our governments and policymakers? How can our governments help us to do the valuable work that we know we can do? And how can we get the message to the right place that we ourselves need investment? In addition, do our governments truly understand the role that geospatial data can play in identifying areas of risk and developing solutions? And how can we show them what is possible? And finally, how are we collaborating with other organisations to drive forward our input? And are there additional ways that we can do this? At a very simple level, do our governments and decision makers realise that we can help? And if they don't, how can we change that? So to facilitate the conversation during the conference, we split up into breakout groups across the 4 goals for COP26 to give people a forum to discuss and share their experiences and ideas. And there was a lot of discussion, as I'm sure you can imagine. So my next slides will just pull out some of the high-level points that came out of our conversations. So current predictions show that the world is not on track to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. So a change in our energy sources mean that we need to locate the resources for a low carbon world, pinpoint the ideal locations for clean power sources, understand where the consumers are, and plan new distribution networks. Emission reduction will need us to locate, for example, CO2 storage sites, or use data to monitor and curtail deforestation. So we discussed how we can become the source of authoritative data, for example, through the data center concept, and also how data harmonization and data sharing will be crucial to enable the data to actually be used. And we must work to fully understand our stakeholders and help them achieve their goals, which will enable our message to filter wider and help to show our relevance. Showcasing what's been achieved can help governments to visualize the benefits, and stories should be shared so that organizations that are not as far along their journey with their governments can use case studies from elsewhere to demonstrate what they themselves can achieve. And we need to help to build knowledge external to our agencies on how our data can be used. We may understand how to work with the data, but there are many people that don't, and yet often these are the people that really need to understand the power of data and how they can use it. And we must also remember to think outside the speciality of our particular agency. Bringing data together from other areas will enhance our own data and provide better insight to answer key questions. Data is only useful if it's in the hands of the people that will use it, and it's our job to make sure that the data is available, accessible, and usable. So goal 2 centres around the fact that we need to adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. As the Earth's climate warms, our governments and societies are changing to adapt, and location data helps to identify and assess where and when the impacts of climate change will be felt most, and where the most vulnerable citizens are. Better location information will help governments to target their resilience measures and their efforts to protect those areas that are most at risk. So some of the key points that came out of this session were around how we need to build a solid foundation of good data in large quantities to enable change to happen, and that data linking across agencies will be crucial as we aim to unlock more value from the data to answer more questions, and this will require greater sharing and reuse of data. And we have a real opportunity to protect communities. So as well as talking to our governments, we also need to work at community level to create public awareness of our data and how it can be used. Communities have the ability to affect change on the ground immediately, so it's as important that the knowledge of the data goes to them as much as it needs to go to the government and policymakers. And we need to be proactive in delivering ideas and solutions using our data, and also in informing others how they can use our data. And we need to look to how we can support each other. We all have the same problems, and collaboration can help us all. In essence, we need to be the key enablers of change. So mobilising finance to tackle the impacts of climate change requires quality information and clear evaluation of risks. Natural disasters generate fiscal risk and create budget uncertainty. Location information is key to assessing the disaster risk and evaluating the impact. The better the information, the clearer the risk, the more accurately we can judge the effectiveness of climate mitigation measures and economic impact. We need to build the narrative on the value of data. Politicians and decision makers need to be made aware of how geospatial data can help them make effective investment in mitigation measures. They can then recognise the value of investing in the data so that agencies can collect, manage and deliver the highest quality data to enable the best decision making. And we must showcase how combining and linking cross-sector data can enable more informed decision making, and how investing in the data infrastructure is equally important. We need to build our relationships with the private sector and innovators who have a growing interest in climate goals. Engaging with them on geospatial data and establishing what information they really need can potentially encourage private sector investment. We need to engage with the finance community. What do they need help with to help them make sustainable investments? Geospatial data can be used to reduce risk and also maximise impact by enabling the implementation of mitigation policies and also facilitating the measurement of their success. In addition, effective management and sharing of data can reduce costs by avoiding unnecessary duplication of data. We need to demonstrate the importance of our data to gain investment, which will enable us to produce authoritative data that can then be used to mobilise finance. So location data can play a key role in helping countries to work together to deliver. The response to climate change is sometimes fractured and divided by administrative boundaries or political priorities, and working from a shared foundation of location information can enable governments to take a collaborative approach to problems. A very clear message that came out of the discussions was a need to work together to raise awareness of the capability of geospatial data. We need to create and participate in networks that can help us share our ideas and to get our message out. We need to develop opportunities to pull resources together and level up access to technology and capability through partnership with the private sector. There are challenges, but there are also opportunities. We should create regional groups to deal with cross-border issues in addition to looking at things at a global scale. The scale of the collaboration effort needed is huge, but national mapping and geospatial agencies are well placed to coordinate the use of data from wide-ranging sources and provide the linkages that are needed to enhance the opportunity for innovative partnerships. We need to take the role of leading change together so that we can offer our collective response. So during the conference, our conference keynote, Farana Yamin, made a crucial point. She said that we have a duty to demand action, and it's not enough to just create the data. And she's right. We have a responsibility to make sure that our data is usable and accessible to the people that need it. And we must actively engage with our governments and our funders to take the conversation to them, to make them aware of the power of data and how it can really help to tackle the challenges we face. This is our call to action. So to provide a method for national mapping and geospatial agencies to be able to take this message to the people who have the power and influence, a statement paper has been produced following the conference. So the conversations that were had helped to define the role that we feel we can play in support of the COP26 goals. So as already mentioned in previous presentations, we feel we could play a key role in cross-border collaboration to help all countries tackle common issues. We should collect and curate authoritative data and then make that data accessible and reusable, whilst encouraging others to expand on our work to develop innovative solutions to specific problems. And we need to sponsor and embrace agreed standards so that we can help to ensure that technical solutions can tackle common problems in a consistent way. So the conference also helped us to define our pledge, which is that we recognise the importance of location data in fighting the impacts of climate change, and that our work has never been more important. And also that we will enable change, we will enable nations to respond better to climate challenges, and we will act now to make ourselves sustainable organisations. So the statement paper has some key recommendations, which Matt's previously mentioned in his introduction, about how we need to take an active leadership role. National mapping and geospatial agencies need to be advocates for location data in our countries and showcase the benefits that location data can bring to adaptation and mitigation policies, and that we need to act as drivers for change and encourage people to use location data. And we also must recognise that a changing climate is a global issue and work with other networks in creating new networks to move to using internationally agreed standards and enable the use of trusted data for adaptation and mitigation solutions. For our governments, you have a crucial role in mandating the use of available authoritative location data from national mapping and geospatial agencies as a framework for bringing together multiple sources of information, linking critical data from government, industry and research. And you also have a role in improving the data infrastructure and assets through investing in the collection and maintenance of high quality geospatial data. So my presentation today is just a brief summary of a hugely interesting and valuable collective conversation. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at the statement paper. It contains a lot more information and has some interesting examples that build on the interesting examples we've already heard this morning. And these showcase what is already happening as we strive to provide our assistance. So the website link is up on the screen, and the paper has also been translated into all 6 United Nations languages. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time, and I'll be able to take any questions during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Nikki, thanks so much. And that was a really excellent overview of, actually, as you said, which was a really rich but very detailed conversation, which covered a lot of ground this year in the conference, and sets us up really well alongside the broader discussions today, of course, and more broadly around COP26 ahead of a Cambridge conference in full next April. I just wondered if I could ask one question, really, just in closing, to yourself, perhaps Matt, and also Raphael, just generally as to your own observations. As you know, the Cambridge conference, to me, perhaps unsurprisingly, you know, comes at a really important time in our organization's collective missions. National mapping and geospatial agencies at large, the collaborations which are taking place internationally, which today and this conversation we've had this morning has really painted the importance of. I mean, if there was one thing and one significant change that came from this particular round of Cambridge conference, and the impact that the global geospatial community can have on climate action, what would that be? And I realize that's a pretty big question to end this morning on, but perhaps speak from your hearts as to what you hope for most from the next 12 months. And Nikki, you finished off last, so can I come to you first?
Oh, yeah. So I think we're at such a. I think we're just at such a crucial point where there's such a global collective demand for data and the ability to actually work together with that data, not just in isolation in our agencies and not just in isolation in our countries, that there's just that need to work together to produce the data. And also for those of us that are further along our path, to be able to give assistance and strengthen capacity in other organizations where they can, you know, use what we've done and implement it for themselves. I think it's just, I mean, and it's huge. It's a huge challenge for all of us, but I think it's one that we really need to take on.
Yeah, that's great, Nikki. Thank you. Matt, to you, perhaps.
So just to build on Nikki's point, I think it's absolutely right. If we can start to build a single, almost not a single data standards, I think some of the work that's going on with the IGIF and the work to support the Sustainable Development Goals is really critical. But how can we try and build a consistent view of the of both the geographical elements of our of climate change, but also the societal, the environmental challenges? How can we start to build a single set of data that is trusted and authoritative? Because that spiraling or exponentially growing data landscape requires us to be the foundation, to be the fundamental underpinning data for many of the challenges that are going to be emerging over the next few years. And the sooner we can start to build a coherent framework that other countries, in particular research institutions, can build off of and tackle individual problems, tackle individual challenges, the sooner we will secure our role as national geospatial mapping and geospatial agencies in that space.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Great points. And Raphael, just sort of any closing remarks from yourself on the same theme?
Yes, thank you, David. I couldn't agree more with Matt and Nikki on their final thoughts. I think borders just exist in our maps, and we need to find ways to work together, because for a country like ours, climate change is affecting us in different ways, and we can be as sustainable as possible. But if the rest of the world is following other tracks, or we are impacting in some cases, we will be affected or benefit. And we want to find the benefits of working together and sharing all this knowledge and information in order to improve the well-being of each person in the planet. I think today we had a very nice conversation with different places of the world where this can happen. And thanks for bringing us together today to talk about it.
That's great. Thank you. And I think, the collective comments at the end just kind of point to how much of an opportunity there is to address the very many challenges of climate action through geospatial information together. Just really in closing off today's session, I think today we've really explored the importance of global collaboration in order to achieve better outcomes. And I think it's true to observe that no matter how important our national infrastructures are, that we've heard a lot about, and the national case studies that we're developing, just how important it is that we work together collectively at a global basis in order to advance action, particularly against climate outcomes. I think it's true to observe we will be measured, of course, in how quickly and evenly our nations adapt and mitigate against climate change. And for me personally, if we can look back at some point in the future, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years is probably already feeling too far out. But if we can look back at some point 5-10 years from now and see that the geospatial information infrastructures that we've built, that we put in place, that we've advocated, and we've helped our nations develop, are having positive impact in our global response to climate action, then I think we'll be able to feel collectively very proud in that context. So listen, thank you all of the speakers who have joined us today, to Greg, to Mishka and Tulu, who took us through the integrated geospatial information framework, the advancement in their nations, and to Greg to give that UN context at the outset, and to Matt, to Nikki, to Raphael for this last session on how our organizations, the National Geospatial Mapping Agencies, are taking positive action together at this time in response of climate action. Just in closing off from our hosts, could I also encourage delegates to network after today has finished in the Space and Geospatial Virtual Pavilion on the event platform that you're on just now. And also, of course, just visit a little bit more from the exhibitor and information pages that the Ordnance Survey have put up in advance of today's session. So with that, thank you all very much for all the delegates who have joined us this morning. Thank you to KTN for their brilliant work in bringing us together as a community, actually over the full duration of COP, but particularly this morning and this session. And a special nod again to those who started their day very early for us in the Western Hemisphere, and those in the Eastern stayed up a little bit longer in their working day to present at the end of the day. But with that, thank you again to all the speakers, and I wish you all a successful day, and look forward to catching up with you again soon. Goodbye.